Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
Okay, we're back for part 2. If you haven't watched part 1, then watch it. Otherwise, not much of this will make sense. So, thank you both again for joining me, Perdie and M from Hotbed. So, we were just talking about something that made me come up with have a few questions for you. So the one thing that you mentioned, Perdie, which was really interesting, that the conferences you guys put on, you said something which was something along the lines, I'm going to paraphrase you now, you wanted to make sure that in these events that your guests, that your speakers and so on weren't just sort of that you were actually being practical, sort of getting granular with something. What is the kind of stuff that you think in this space that isn't being sort of talked about enough when it comes to this more granular level, and it is just maybe covered in more of a surface level way?
I think it's a lot of the investor content,
right,
that we're referring to in particular. So we have been to a lot of conferences in our time, and we'll listen to investor panels, and I mean, often you only get 20 or 30 minutes for a panel as well. So by the time everybody's introduced themselves and their fund, that's half of the time gone. And then they'll talk about, I don't know, like how they source deal flow or where they see the ecosystem going. And it's like towing the company line. So you never really get to dig under the hood of what's really going on. And I think for founders, there isn't that much transparency. So they don't really know, once you've submitted a deck, say you submit it to a mailbox, an automatic mailbox, hello@fund.com, you don't really know what happens next. And you don't know really what they're looking for. And you don't really know what good looks like. And because investors, I mean, I understand it from both sides, they want to attract as many potential deals to them as possible, which means they keep everything quite vague, and they want to be open to everyone, and they want to keep as many relationships as they can. So they don't want to just say no. That doesn't actually help founders that much either, because then founders are spending their time contacting VCs who maybe aren't actually really interested in their area, or they're not the right stage for, or they haven't got the right amount of traction for. And so we try to just go deeper and say, okay, what happens next? So somebody sends you a deck, then what do you do? At least let us understand your internal process. And so one fund, like for every thesis that they get, they'll write an antithesis themselves. And so just understanding how they think means that you can then think about it in the same way. Or, there's 3 levels of conversations that we have. So you're going to get an analyst, and then the analyst will present it to the partners, and then the partners will present it to the board, like whatever it is. Just understanding how it operates, and of the founders that you've invested in, how much traction did they have when you invested? Did they have revenue? Did they not have revenue? Like, just to really save founders time. So some of it's as easy as just process, and some of it's more like, what is your actual opinion about something, and try and get these opinions out of investors, which again, if they're representing a fund, might be a bit harder because they might not be able to give their opinion, but for angel investors, it's a little bit easier. And so where do you really see the future of the ecosystem going? Like, what is your opinion on there's normally like a topic that's been trending at that time. So what is your opinion on that topic? Is more money going to come from angels versus VCs? Are you really actually investing in female founders, or is that just something that you're saying? Like, whatever the topic might be at the time.
I might also add to, on the founder side, a lot of especially exited founders, or founders who it's been a while since the early days, when they're talking about what it took to close their first round of investment, they might be like, okay, we reached out to 50 angel investors and we finally got a conversation, and then we ended up closing. It's like, okay, but what exactly were you putting in those emails? Like, literally tell us exactly what you put in those emails. What were the exact questions that came up in those meetings? Like, and getting super, super granular on those little things, because a lot of times you hear as a founder, okay, this is what the person did. And then it's like, you pull up your email and you're like, I'm going to write that email to investors too. And you're like, wait, what do I actually put in it? And so that's what we want to be able, that's what we want our audience to, extract from this conversation.
Yeah, it's super useful. And do you ever get concerned with potential overwhelm? Because it's something I think about a lot, right? With founders, doing the advisory work that I do fractional work, I do, all sorts of bits in this ecosystem, just like you guys. And I'm concerned time and time again for for founders in terms of the bombardment of information, and quite often conflicting information.
Oh, yeah.
And so surface level stuff isn't useful because it's too broad, but then getting too granular can be sometimes really contradictory from one another. Like, oh, you should never open an email with this, and then the other one says you should always open an email like this, and it's like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, yeah, do you guys worry about that? Like,
we talk about this all the time because I mean, we host a lot of workshops, and we'll have angels come in like sometimes in back-to-back weeks and be like, if you put your competition slide in a matrix instead of a graph, like, I'll never look at your deck again. And then the next week someone comes in and says the exact opposite. And so as a founder, you're like, what on earth am I supposed to do? You know, I can't possibly make everyone happy. And like, it's such a ridiculous burden on founders. I think it's better that founders are aware of the different opinions. And then we always say, like, at the end of the day, you're the one who's in charge of your company. You're the one who makes the decisions here, and like, make the decision with conviction, make an informed decision with conviction, but like, it's up to you. But I also think, like, just on a personal level, like, I used to listen to so much startup content on podcasts. Like, literally, there was never a time that I was not listening to a startup podcast or a book. And it just got to the point where it's like,
I appreciate you listening.
I would always
being a fan of the show.
But it's like, it's about balance. It's like, you know, it's like a diet where, you know, you don't want all of your calories to come from, you know, fat. You also want like the protein and the carbs. And so make sure you're not just too focused on one type of content. Yeah.
But it is true. And I worry about it a lot, being someone who puts a lot of content out there in the world. I do worry about it a lot because my whole brand is being the no bullshit advisor, because I believe there's too much bullshit in this space. And then at the same time, I feel like I'm filling it full of bullshit. Like, you know, like, mostly when I open my mouth, not my guests. You know what I mean? And so it does worry me, you know, that I might be contributing to that.
I agree that the one bit of unsolicited advice that you should give is to not give any unsolicited advice.
Right.
And then that's what we're all doing the whole time.
Yeah. But I like your answer there, Em, about like, you know, ultimately it's up to you. I think the number one / the maybe two pieces of advice I give founders the most is just do what the hell you want to do and have fun doing it. Like, those two things are so important in my view that I think often it's forgotten about. It's that there's such concern about pleasing everyone else, none of which, you know, most of these people will never really give a shit or be involved in your business. But you're constantly doing everything to try and please these people you're never going to meet or have a relationship with. If you forget that the whole point of wanting to be a founder, an entrepreneur, a business owner, whatever, is to have fun and to do what you want to do. And like, that's got to be the focus. And if that means you do something slightly different in the end, then great, because that's what innovation is, you know? I don't know. What do you guys think?
You can't build your life around or your business around people pleasing ever. Like, you will never be happy. People can sniff a people pleaser from a mile away. Like, that sort of behavior is very obvious, and I think it's naturally a little unattractive. And so I think it's better to have a little boldness, even if you perhaps overstep or even if you make a mistake, because it comes across as authentic. And again, even if it doesn't resonate with people, they'll still respect you for being you.
Right. There's a fine line between, I suppose, being authentic and being an arsehole, though, right? So it's just about towing that line somewhat. I think I toe that line quite regularly as the no bullshit advisor. I'm like, but I always say there's a difference between direct.
Asshole.
Well, no, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. I think there's a difference between being direct and honest without kindness and being direct and honest with kindness, right? Where empathy is involved and empathy isn't. And I think there's a difference there. And especially when people need to hear it, because I'm assuming you guys must have come across people that really needed to hear some sort of pretty harsh roots of advice in your time, right?
Yeah. And go ahead.
We have had investors, like, for anyone that's listening to this thinking, yeah, but if an investor tells me to do something, I'm just going to do it because I want their money. We have had investors say to us that if they sat down with someone for half an hour and said, you need to change 20 things, and then someone then came back to them and had changed all 20 things, they would think that they don't have enough integrity in their own business and their decisions, which means actually you have to listen to some of it, but you can't listen to absolutely everything that they say, because then the investor thinks, well, if you're just going to completely change your opinion about everything based on one person's feedback, how good of a business leader are you going to be? Like you need to,
that's so manipulative.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's gaslighting, basically. Like,
Yeah.
that's, you know what I mean? Like, that's like my wife saying, you know, that, like, can you imagine if you did that in a relationship setting? That, like, that's abuse. You know,
the power. My pet peeve at the moment, from an advice perspective, which I've just had so many founders have come to me and said this, and it just really annoys me, is that they have gone to a VC to get some advice about their pre-seed raise, and that VC will say, you should be raising at least 3 times that amount. Let's say they're raising 250K. You should be raising at least 750 to $1 million. You'll find it so much easier to raise more money. And I keep saying to these people, are these investors going to invest in you? Are they going to invest in you in this round? They're probably not, because they probably don't invest at pre-seed. So it's very easy for them to say, yeah, if you can get one investor to write your 500 grand ticket, brilliant. But like at pre-seed, you're most likely going to be getting angel money. And so just telling someone, oh, raise 3 times the amount. And then they take that feedback really seriously because coming from a VC.
and then they find
so
it
they're just
3 times
try and change their whole pitch deck, their financial forecast, hiring strategy, what they're going to spend the money on. And then they're going to go out and pitch all these angels with their 750 to 1 million raise at pre-seed. And I'm like, it's wasting people's time. And it really bugs me.
That's a good call
Yeah.
out.
Perdie, is there any chance you'd be able to close those curtains actually now? Because it looks like you've become more and more of a shadow creature over time. Yeah, no, it's true. I like I said, I'm constantly worried about it because of and especially I imagine probably it must be even more top of mind for you guys because of the amount that you're involved in the space and the amount of content or literal advice that's going out to people. It is something to be careful of. But as we've already established, you're both the Stanley Kubricks of this space. So I'm sure that you've thought about all of this on a very granular level and have given it a lot of thought. So that's great. Before I ask something else, I wanted to dig into just really quickly. What can people expect the future of Hotbed? Aside from, because I do want to ask about this product you're working on, but aside from that, what can people expect? Do you have any plans with these events or anything else you're doing that you can share that is maybe on the horizon?
The product is the main thing on the horizon.
Okay.
But we would like a startup world where every single founder and angel investor around the world interacts with Hotbed in some part of their either fundraising or building part of their business. So you're, as a founder, you would either work with Hotbed or go to Hotbed for support as you're building your product or as you're fundraising, and then for angel investors to find investment.
Fair enough. Okay, then. So in that case, let's talk about the product. So what can you reveal about that, I guess, would be my first question.
Sure. So one of the big things that if you're a founder who's gone through one of our programs, you'll be aware of, but isn't something we talk about too much publicly, is the data side of what we do. And so what Perdie and I have been testing over the past 18 months or so are what are the pieces of information that provide the most amount of insights to investors about the trajectory of your company. And so if you're investing in a pre-seed company, you're looking at the pitch deck, which tells you static information and then tells you forecasts, but it doesn't tell you much more than that. And what we hear time after time from investors is the number one thing they care about is who the founder is. And
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
I think when you hear that, you're often thinking, okay, like what's the company the founder used to work at? Where do they go to school? But what an investor usually means is, who is this person as a founder? Like how relevant are their skills to being a founder? So they want to know like the pace of execution, how focused they are, their market expertise, how they communicate with users. And then what do they do with like that user feedback? Do they integrate it with the product roadmap, or do they just kind of ignore it? And so what we've been testing is, what are the pieces of information that we can track and show to investors that is indicative of the founder's skill set on those respective categories. And so now that we've collected over 20,000 points of data on startup growth, we're productizing that. So we're able to will be able to benchmark startups and tell the founder where they sit amongst their peers, as well as sharing the information with investors, but also giving investors a more holistic view on who the founder is and what's the growth potential of the startup.
That's super interesting. And it's interesting as well because I've been having a lot of conversations about this with people recently because of the stealth startup I'm working on. So maybe we should be talking about that at some point separately. But also because I had recently on the podcast, actually it would have been out. Yeah, by the time this comes out, it would have been out. Soma from ETA Technologies. Are you familiar with this gentleman? No, does that not ring a bell? So, no, well, you should definitely look into it. Really interesting guy, making waves in the startup scene in the UK, and is an ex-VC himself, and has created a psychological evaluation system specifically for startup founders.
I think I've heard
it's okay. Yeah. And it's super interesting because of obviously the character traits and the personality traits that you need in order to be successful in the startup world are very different from corporate. And obviously a lot of the traditional psychometric evaluations are designed for more of a corporate space and setting. So it's super interesting. And we had a really, sort of granular conversation on that there about what it takes. So when you're looking at it, and I come at it from the perspective of skill set, so very, very much hard skills. And so, we've had some interesting conversations there about how we can potentially join forces to cover a lot of bases for investors and to really get a really good, a proper picture, I would say, of things. So, so you guys sort of, you were saying about benchmarking and looking at data points. So what are they? Are they more based on the assumptions that the founders are bringing to the table? Is there some sort of evaluation that's happening? Questionnaires, like how is that? How are you planning on doing that and delivering that?
So it's weekly growth updates on quantitative and qualitative metrics. And so part of what we've been testing are what are the exact questions that we need to be asking founders, because sure, it's one thing to get weekly update on their revenue, but for a lot of startups, either one, revenue is non-existent, or two, it's a downstream effect of something else they're doing in the business that is driving the revenue. And we want to find out about that. And yeah, I won't go into too much detail around all the questions we asked, just because it will probably get nuanced and boring. But it's some of the things that you expect around revenue, but then also a lot of it is how user focused they are.
Interesting. And so when are you hoping to sort of reveal this to the world? Have you got a bit of a timeline?
Next year.
Okay. Which isn't long these days. So that's great. Yeah. And how long have you guys been working on this?
So
2 years.
Yeah. 2 years.
Yeah, we launched Hotbed in May 2022. Well, that was our first Founders Camp event. And the first cohort that we launched was also May 2022. And that was the first kind of beta group of founders that went through the experience of submitting weekly growth updates to Hotbed as part of their program. And then we've run 7 programs since then, kind of iterating on what data we're collecting and how they're reporting it. MVP version of the tech that we've built.
Oh wow! So this was really front of mind for quite a while then. This concept. So then that data gathering occurs throughout the duration of the program. So you said, was it about 6 weeks? You say?
Yeah, it's about 8 weeks of data. So we do 6 weeks and then 2 weeks post program.
Right. Super interesting. All right, then. Well, listen, I want to move away from Hotbed, if that's okay. I know that's obviously all you guys do, but I think everyone's heard so much about it now to a point where I think they should definitely be going to check it out, like you said, and be getting involved in some form or another. So, and obviously the link to Hotbed and all what you guys are doing will be in the description. But I want to know a bit more broadly, I want to open it up more generally now. This is the part of the show where we sort of tend to go off on a bit of a tangent. So what are some of the things that are going on in this space that just aren't being talked about enough, in your opinion, for both of you?
Do you want to put it?
You go first.
Okay. I would say mental health is now a hot topic. But I think it's great that people are talking about it. Founders, it's been widely reported, have a much higher likelihood of suffering from anxiety, depression, and personality disorders. I think the way that it's being talked about is not particularly helpful. And I'd like to see more expanded conversations in the space. I really think there's a lot more people suffering than we realize. And yeah, I'd like to see that be.
What do you mean the way we're talking about it isn't particularly helpful? What do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah. So to start with, I hate the term mental health. I actually think that like I think just calling it mental health starts us off with the wrong foot. Like realistically, there's no difference between your mental health and your real health, and kind of adding on that little like disclaimer at the start, I think instantly makes people feel a bit more like, I don't want to say guilty, but like, if you have a problem, let's say with your liver, you don't feel like there's something intrinsically wrong with you as a human. You have a problem with your liver and you need to speak with the doctor and you'll get it addressed. But it's not an innate part of your personality versus something like depression and anxiety. It's very easy to feel a lot of shame associated with that. Like, why can't I just get this right? What's wrong with me? And it's like, hey, you have a health problem. Like you don't have to add on, you have a mental health problem. You have a health problem that needs to be addressed. So I would like to shift that part of the conversation. And then also the tool sets right now that we give people to address these problems, I don't think is sufficient. And it's really challenging because right now the sort of go-to path for people who have anxiety and depression, it's like, okay, see a therapist, work out, get the basics right, good food, good nutrition, good sleep, see a therapist, and maybe get on some meds. And for a lot of people, they do that and it doesn't work. Like treatment-resistant depression is a massive issue. And it's hard because it's like, what do you tell someone who is suffering deeply and being, and what we give to them is not helping them. I think it's hard to say, hey, we actually don't have all the right solutions. And I'd like to have that be said more. I could talk so much more about that, but I'll stop my monologue there.
No, well, look, this isn't the show where you need to stop yourself if you've got something to say. But please do continue. But I would just really briefly sort of weigh in, if you don't mind, which is that I've battled depression and anxiety all my life, and I say battled. Now I've come to peace with it. Actually, we found common grounds. Depression, anxiety, and I, between ourselves, we've all just sort of sat down collectively and agreed that, okay, we're all just going to live together and try and make the most of it, I guess, which is my story. But that's not, I know that's not the same for everyone. But
I love that metaphor.
Yeah, but I think, and that's just my own personal philosophy that works for me. But I think that is, for me, the only way it could be done is just actually recognizing that it's a part of myself, but not something that I'm particularly proud of. Because this is the other thing that I think I do think there's another problem that's happening within the space of mental health, whatever you want to call it. Which again, I agree actually that is a weird term, but where it is, for some, worn as a bit of a badge of honor, and it shouldn't be. That there's a lot of discussion now around various different ailments, or what's the other term that I guess thrown around a lot? Neurodivergence, divergent thinking, all of that, which a lot of people seem to be shouting about in a way that I think is almost, like I say, wearing it as a bit of a badge of honor, as opposed to something to overcome or just make peace with. I don't know if I'm expressing that correctly, but you know what I mean. It's just it shouldn't be what defines you. No. It is just part of you, and we all have elements of this, and it's just like, okay, great, but actions speak louder than words. Just what's going to define you is what you accomplish and what you do, and the relationships that you keep, not the fact that you're anxious about stuff or you get depressed. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I just find it a bit confusing, the whole thing.
I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, because in some ways, in many ways, as you're talking about mental health and making it a term that we talk about and talking about the different labels of diagnoses, it, I think, hopefully encourages some people who want to bury this stuff to feel more confident talking about it and maybe doing a little check-in on themselves and be like, oh, how is my mental health? So to the extent that it makes people more comfortable talking about it, I think that's wonderful. But when it becomes a point of your identity, then to me, it's like we've lost the plot here. Like, right. And also when it comes to the point where it's a different category than your actual health, again, that's I don't think helpful for anyone. As you said, it's not I think it's like, it's all about acceptance and the path that people have to take in order to accept those parts of themselves. But it's enormously complicated. And I think, 80-90% of the people who have mental health issues, that's a rough percentage, I don't know, are probably going to be able to do the stuff of get your basics right, maybe see a therapist, maybe you need to cut in meds. And like, for them, that's going to be enormously helpful and it's going to work and they're going to be able to move on with their lives. For me and my journey, I did all that stuff, did not move the needle for me at all. So it's like, I spent years in this like hellhole basically of just like this cycle of like trying those different levels and pushing harder and working out twice a day and having my nutrition super right, see a therapist, blah, blah, blah. And none of it moved the needle for me. And it was absolutely horrendous. And like, I think with the labels comes the challenge that when we don't have that many labels to use, like anxiety is such a massive spectrum and it impacts people in very different ways, but we all just use the word anxiety to talk about the challenge with anxiety. And so it's like the analogy I use here is like, if we didn't have any other way to talk about a leg problem other than you can only describe a problem with your leg as I have a problem with my leg. You can't be like, I tore my Achilles. I have my artery is torn, or like I sprained my ankles. Like there's different degrees of injuries within problems with your legs, but we don't have that same language to apply to mental health problems. Yeah, I'm going to use mental health there as a term right there. But like that, I think creates a lot of like guilt and shame for someone who thinks this tool set solved this person's battle with anxiety. Why isn't it solving it for mine? So that's like what I would like to see addressed more heavily.
It's interesting, yeah, because I'll be honest, I'm quite opinionated on this, as you can imagine, and I am on most things, to be fair, which is probably why I do this show, really, just to try and get my opinions out there. But it's interesting that you use the term like a problem to solve or solution there. I think the thing that I come to terms with my journey has been that it's not something that needs solving. That being anxious, being depressed, being sad sometimes, just like being happy or overwhelmed or exhilarated, and all the other emotions that I feel, is part of the human experience, and I have to accept that. And I feel like that there's so much conversation around trying to be fixed, which implies that there is something broken, and actually there isn't. And so I suppose while I agree that like the term mental health is problematic, that it separates it from health, I think the key difference is if you break a leg, that needs fixing. Whereas I'm not entirely certain that for most of the conversation we have around mental illness, aside from some of the more extreme situations, that there is not necessarily anything to be fixed, because of that. In some ways, that spirals, especially the anxiety side of things. As we know, that the contradictory thing about anxiety is just like the more anxious you are, the more anxious you get about being anxious, and so on and so on and so on. And it's just like this death spiral sort of situation. But whereas if it's more of this sort of like, okay, I'm anxious today, and it will pass. I'm sure it will pass. Maybe it won't. But this is part of being alive. And, I don't need to stop being anxious in the same way that you can't stop being hungry, you can't stop being tired, you can't stop being in love, or whatever it might be. These are all just part of being alive, I guess.
I would differentiate it between like the feeling and the behaviors, because I think there are some behaviors that absolutely need to be stopped versus like,
because they can be destructive, right?
Yeah, that's a very good distinction. Like I had a call with my coach the other day, and like this was a few months ago, I was spiraling so heavily on something, and I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. Like, how can I stop? Like, this is horrible. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry. Are you not allowed to spiral on something? Is that illegal? Are you not allowed to do that? And I was like, oh shit. Like, yeah, of course I can do this. Like, okay, I'm spiraling on something that's happening. As you said, like, it's about accepting it. Like, there's not right or wrong with emotions, but like for behaviors, there's a point where it's self-destructive, completely, like, and very, very dangerous. And so that stuff, like, yeah.
But again, I think it ties into that acceptance part, because usually I think those destructive behaviors occur because we're trying to battle it. We're trying our best to put it in a little box and pack it away. Be like, no, not today. I don't want you today. And because of that, I think that's where a lot of those behaviors can come out.
You can, I
don't sort of mismanaging it sometimes. I'm not sure.
I don't think you can stop, or I don't think stopping the root feeling that triggers the behavior is the right approach. But like, you do need solutions to stop certain behaviors, and then probably like that, I don't know, behavior will then manifest itself in hopefully a slightly less worse behavior. But I agree with you. I think trying to stop an emotion is completely counterproductive.
Was it you, Em, that said you studied psychology?
Said either.
Yeah. Sorry, was it you, Em, that said you studied psychology? Or was it you, Perdie?
It was me.
Yeah. So what's your take on this then? I mean, you must have had an interest in psychology, I assume, to study it. So has that carried through? Are you still quite interested in this particular area of topic?
I don't feel like I don't feel like I've got the experience or the knowledge to comment on this topic, really. I'd just be like filling space by
Why
making
not?
noise.
I mean,
So,
because I find that to be interesting as a response. Not to like, I'm not trying to like, crap on your response, but you are a human being. You've experienced life. I feel like everyone's qualified to talk on this to some extent, whether you've had a diagnosis or not. I don't think that's relevant. I think you can have, you must have gone through enough life to, or maybe you haven't. I don't know. Maybe you've lived an extraordinarily happy life with no problems whatsoever. I don't know.
I wouldn't kind of self-diagnose myself with having had any mental health challenges that
Right.
So then to comment on somebody else's experience or how someone should kind of break down their experience or the right or wrong way of processing the experience, like I don't feel like I'm qualified to really give any opinion.
And I agree with you. Even as someone that has been diagnosed with depression, it's not for me. It's not for any of us to say that either. But I would also add that I don't think you need to have a stamp of approval to have an opinion on some of these topics. I think that's something I've noticed that in this day and age that seems to be a bit of a thing. Like unless you are part of a group, unless you're part of this identity, you can't have an opinion on it. And I think that's entirely wrong. I think we can all have opinions on everything. At least that's my own opinion, of which I have many.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
But fair enough. Fair enough. What about you, Perdie? What are some things? And thank you, Em. That's really interesting, and I'm glad to hear, because it is something that's very close to my heart and close to many people's hearts. Yeah. What about you, Perdie? What are some things in this space that isn't being talked about enough, in your opinion?
This is maybe I feel like it's somewhat related to mental health, but kind of seeking validation via social media. So people talk about the impact of TikTok or Instagram on mental health, but people don't seem to be talking about the impact of LinkedIn. And everyone is using LinkedIn in exactly the same way as they're using all other social media platforms, which is to get validation that they are doing something right, and I'm talking in the context of founders now. But the way that people are using LinkedIn, I actually find kind of concerning, and it's a bit frustrating that you feel like you have to play the game in order to be successful. And there is definitely a game that is being played, and there are people that play it very well, and then there are people that are learning how to play it. But if you don't play it, you can't win. And the pressure to communicate what you're doing in a certain way, because there are rules, like with any game, there are these rules of engagement that people are learning along the way. If you choose not to play it, this is the quandary that I'm in right now. I haven't even really decided like where I sit on it necessarily. I feel like if you looked at my, you'd probably think I was playing the game, but I hate playing it at the same time, and I don't even know how many people are in the same boat. And I find it really weird, and I don't know where it's going to result. I don't know where this is going, but from 4 years ago when we started Spy Startups till now, it seems to be getting so much worse. Like the kind of the need to have this personal brand and how you build your personal brand, and everyone responding in similar ways. And so posting, kind of like what you were saying, like wearing a badge of honor, but like the more and more vulnerable content you're posting, or the more and more personal content you're posting, that's what's going to get the likes and the engagement. So people just keep doing more and more and more, and like it's like kind of like sucks away at your soul.
It's true. I think the post I had the most successful recently was a picture of ramen noodles. And there's me like creating all this content and like coming out with all of this, like what I think to be valuable stuff, and then a pack of some ramen noodles like does really well. So, but no, I hear a lot of people, as you can imagine, because I do a lot of pro bono work, and time and time again, I'm asked about this as part of their strategy. And I have some pretty standard advice there too, I guess, similar to kind of like the whole just do what you want and enjoy the journey. It's kind of similar for that, but actually I think that the problem starts because people are approaching it like social media. It's not a social media platform, it's a networking platform. And there is a very big difference. Well, at least there should be. What's confusing about it, though, is that LinkedIn is presenting itself more and more like a social media platform. And that is what's confusing everyone, but especially with the introduction of, more vertical video and stuff recently. It's blurring the line. And that's really odd, because I always just use the example of like an actual networking event, and you guys know events, you know what you're talking about here, so you should get this. But at an event, you don't walk around walking straight up to people and pitching them. You don't. You chat. You engage in conversation. You become social. You hospitality, right? You become a social butterfly. You just chat with people, tell them about yourself, ask questions about them, and just enjoy the moment. And I think if the moment you go into networking events with an expectation to get something out of it, is the moment that you kind of ostracize yourself from everyone else. You become a bit of a pariah. You become the salesman of the group, and no one likes the salesman in a networking event. You know what I mean? And I learned that the hard way, working in sales, going to lots of networking events, trying to give out business cards to anyone, and you just immediately get, you're ostracized. And it's the same thing on social media. And so I just help people to have fun.
Yeah.
That's it.
It doesn't feel, I don't think it feels authentic. I think everyone's showing off like their authentic self, which is a very curated version of the them that they are happy to show off in order to get the most validation. And It's so inauthentic.
But isn't that just true of life? I mean, it's not like we're being 100% authentic on this call, or 100% authentic in most of our interactions. And depending on who we're with in different social circumstances, we're going to be a slightly different version of ourselves. With our partners, we'll be different than we are with our parents or their parents, or with certain friends, with work colleagues. So isn't that just another one of those situations?
Yeah, probably. But it seems to be, I don't know, like with talking about like social media and LinkedIn not being social media, but now it kind of blurring the lines. It's almost like it's behind social media. So social media, like Instagram, you can hide how many likes you've got now. If you don't want people to know how your engagement is, you've got the ability to change that. Whereas LinkedIn is behind. So everyone has visibility on how many likes you've got. Everyone has visibility on what your engagement is like. Everybody has an opinion on it, and therefore you have an opinion on it. And so it creates the need to create this content, or like to say something that's authentic / inauthentic. So I think it is kind of a reflection of human nature, but it's almost making it worse by how the platform is designed.
Yeah. It's an odd one. I've been sort of all in on LinkedIn for a couple of years now, and I've got to say, like from the perspective of the way that it opens up my world, especially living where I live in the UK compared to somewhere like London, the fact that we met on there, and then you can come on the show and we can talk like this and get to know each other, and we can share your story. Like, it's stuff like that as a connection platform, as a networking platform, I think it's unrivaled. But you're absolutely right. There are other aspects to it that can come across as a bit false. But
yeah, I agree. By the way, we use it all the time, and like the DMs, and
that's where the value is for me.
That could connect with people and that kind of thing. It's the homepage, that scrolling homepage that I'm talking about.
Yeah, you're right. I maybe part of that is just being a bit more conscientious about who it is that you consume the content from, and don't be afraid to remove people if it's just making you feel a bit shitty, basically, which is probably good advice for most social media platforms, really. But something like Instagram is really going to be generally full of, we've only got ourselves to blame, I guess. There's a certain amount of personal responsibility, I guess, we have to take. I'm always forever talking about personal responsibility, and and being in the tech space too, I don't really want to point the finger at the company. A lot of the time I'm like, we're the consumer, we dictate what they do, so maybe let's it's like if they keep making crappy films but we keep buying the ticket, it's like, well, they're going to keep making crappy films, guys. Like, come on. So I don't know, it's tough, isn't it? Fair enough. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for indulging my curiosity there.
What's your thing that you think?
I'm glad you asked. What's my thing that I think? Good question. There's quite a few, but I'll try and stick to one. I think the one main thing that really irks me is the basics of starting a business, and I'm talking about the super basics. For most people who have an idea, a business idea, don't start because they don't even know how to go about registering their company on Companies House. They don't even know how to put together a basic business plan, where to even, not even 0 to 1, but like 0 to 1, 0.01. Like it's, and we take that, I think, in this space for granted because we're a bit further along in it. And just in the same way that I think you were saying about how some of the, the VCs out there and so on, they're talking at a level which isn't granular because they're, or exited founders and so on, because they're so far along the journey, they've kind of forgotten about the earlier days. And we're all guilty of this too, as well, I think, in this context. There is a huge amount of people in the world who aren't living in the tech hubs of the world, like we talked about, who have no access, let alone time, money, or resources to even begin to look at how do I go about registering a business, where do I even start? And also maybe don't have the literacy, either literally or tech literacy, to do that as well. There's a poverty there that's to do with tech literacy or tech poverty as a whole, where some, we forget there are a lot of people without laptops or the internet still, or good quality internet. And, so there's all of that sort of thing. That's the stuff I think that, I don't know if either of you have much of thoughts on that, but that's the thing that plagues my mind quite often.
You're talking from a like tech startup specific perspective, because when I was in
not just tech startup, just business as a whole. Because it's not just about those that want to become, the new tech startup founder, but also just someone who maybe wants to start a window cleaning business and they've got no idea where to start. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's funny because when I was in Ghana, everybody, I'd say the vast majority of people are entrepreneurs, and they're entrepreneurs out of necessity, not out of desire.
Right.
And there's two very different types of business. And the reason why we went there is because there's a lot of copycat businesses going on. So if you sell fruit on the market, next door to your market stand will be someone else selling fruit on the market, because they saw the other person sold a lot of fruit and they need the lowest risk, highest potential for success business out there. So people are entrepreneurs because they can't get another job. And it's a totally different mindset to actually being an entrepreneur makes me this rock star, super cool, going out there doing something really innovative. It's, I need to make money. How do I make money? This person's selling fruit, I'm going to sell fruit mindset. And it has nothing to do with how you register a business, what paperwork you need. It's how do I make money? That's their starting point. And that's the easiest route to making money rather than the hardest route to making money. And that was kind of one of my first proper exposures to entrepreneurship, was that mindset, rather than I think the mindset that you're talking about, which is like, I want to start a business, not I need to do this.
Right. Well, I suppose maybe there are some cases where it will also be that, right? Because for a lot of people, it's kind of like, we've got to bear in mind, we still do have that in certain parts of our country and Western countries as a whole, where people really have very little options. And that may be a similar thing, or they're stuck in a career path that they're not happy with, and it's like slowly wearing them down and destroying them. And they've always got this idea, and they're all, they're that friend at the pub that's always going on about it, like, I'm going to quit that job, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and they never do. And it's like, it's because they're totally wrapped up in the job and maybe having kids or whatever, and they just don't have the time, and they don't. There's no one. And quite often to these people, I say, speak to local chambers of commerce, because there's usually a ton of resources there to help. But it's just even saying that, and people aren't. If you're not looking, you don't find it. And quite often people don't have that. And that's what kind of my point is. It's just like going back to what I was saying earlier about, I don't think that we as a startup community are thinking sometimes enough about what we can do, the resources we have at our disposal that can trickle down to way further down in the sort of in the rungs than we realize. We've got so much that we can offer. Maybe we're not doing enough to go beyond just our immediate reach of the tech startup scene, right? That there are individuals out there that could really take a lot from this, and that's why I do a lot of pro bono work. You know, I work a lot with young people or older people, whatever, who are just completely blissfully unaware of everything to do with owning a business or startups or anything. Just to be like, you know, and sometimes I get people on it just like, hey man, I want to open a car wash one day, but I'm stuck working, you know, 2 shifts a day, every day, looking after my kids, this, that, and the other. I have no idea where to even start. What do I do? You know,
Or people that own my sister has an Etsy store. She really likes to knit. And so she sells some of her scarves and hats and jumpers and stuff on an Etsy store. I don't think she would consider herself a business or an entrepreneur or any of that terminology, but she is making something and selling it and getting value from that exchange. So
exactly. And this is my point. There are thousands of people like that. You know, hundreds of thousands of people like that in the world that have a hobby that maybe want it, or they're good at something, but they just don't know how to monetize it. Maybe they don't always want to, but you know what I mean? Like I had a DJ, funny enough, you mentioned about your DJing. I had a DJ, funny enough, that did a pro bono session with me a little while back, and she was in a similar boat. She was like, you know, what do I do next? How do I get this to the next level? You know, I had someone who wanted to become a film director. Like there's all these kinds of things. It's almost like it becomes career advice at some point. There's kind of a very fine line, but I feel like that's kind of what we should be helping with. And I suppose the other one that I'm very strongly passionate about too, which you were kind of alluding to there in a way, is sales as a whole. That's where I built my career from originally, in sales and marketing leadership. So I'm very passionate about that. And a lot of the misinterpretations around what it is to be a salesperson. And I think it's a skill set that is closely tied to expert communication skills that I think we should be really encouraging everyone to get heavily involved with, whether that's public speaking, writing, you know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's my 10 cents for what it's worth. I don't know if that was particularly interesting for you guys, but
more to think.
But yeah, absolutely. Well, look, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll let you guys wrap it up. So so tell me what 2 things. What is the sort of on the agenda? What, by the time this comes out, what's going on for you guys? You mentioned there's going to be another conference soon, but what else is going to be happening around shortly after the time that this comes out that people should be sort of paying attention to for you guys?
1st of October, we start our new Hotbed Expand program, which is a 6-week program that Em mentioned right at the beginning for fundraising founders who have raised friends and family or have revenue of at least 100K and a fundraising again. It's a virtual program taking place over 6 weeks. So for founders in that position anywhere in the UK, Europe, or globally, which is all on our website, and then you'll see Expand program at the top.
Awesome. I do have one other quick question I was meant to ask earlier and I completely forgot. When it comes to investors, you find that, especially VCs, you find that they tend to turn their nose up at businesses. Is it best to have a lot of revenue or none at all? Basically, that's kind of my question. Because I've in my experience speaking with VCs, they tend to prefer to see a lot or nothing, but just a little bit of traction tends to bring more questions and scrutiny than nothing sometimes.
You want to either be selling the vision or basically capitalizing on your success. And so, as you said, anything that's in the middle, like we're 3 months, we launched 3 months ago, you know, we're getting some traction, but we need your money to grow. Not a super compelling narrative to investors. You typically want one or the other.
Yeah. Okay. That's good to know, because I think that's just sort of validated what I'd been hearing somewhat. And I think that's important for people to realize, because a lot of people that I speak to, they're in a similar sort of position. They're like 3-6 months down the road, we started generating revenue. That's what they wanted. They wanted traction. It's like, they're just going to ask for more.
Yeah. If they want traction, they want
never
a lot
enough.
of traction. They don't want a little bit.
Yeah.
You're giving them something to scrutinize at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't invite unwanted questions and scrutiny. For sure. Yeah. Awesome. Good. Well, listen. Thank you both so much for being here. I'll be honest. I do have a million more questions, but I know that I have to let you go. So I'm gonna do that. But maybe another time. Where should people go and check you out? You mentioned the website. Where else should people check you guys out, either individually or what you're doing? And I'll put all the links in the description below.
Obviously, check out our LinkedIn page full of really great content.
Of course, because LinkedIn is
We love
is
LinkedIn
the place to
and
be.
we're basic fans. Just not if you follow us.
By the way, this episode will be sponsored by LinkedIn.
But seriously, do check out our LinkedIn if you want to follow.
Yeah, we're actually on all of the social media platforms, Instagram,
All of the TikTok, Instagram, everything.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
our TikTok is fire. It's so underappreciated. Honestly, we're serving up great content on TikTok. So
Yeah.
check us there.
Yeah, okay. Slightly contradictory to what we were talking about. But it's
Give
okay.
us
It's
validation
educational.
TikTok, please.
Right.
like, follow, subscribe, engage. We need
Yeah.
Content
I was about to say I never end the episode, so thanks guys. Make sure to like and follow and subscribe. But I might just do it just for the shits and giggles. But yes, please go and like and share and subscribe to Perdie and M on Hotbed and their various social media platforms. But yeah, I will put all the links in the description, so people can presumably get in touch, apply, attend some of your events, things like that. And what you guys are doing is really amazing, and I really appreciate you sharing the journey. I think it's super important to people to hear all of the various ways in which they can get involved in this ecosystem, which is awesome, and we love it. You guys have got involved in a really meaningful and positive way that I know has impacted thousands of people's lives very, very positively in their businesses. I've spoken to them and they've said as much. So keep up the amazing work, and it's super exciting what you guys have got on the horizon. We'll definitely have to talk about that separately too, because I think there might be some things that we can do to support each other there. And as you know, I know a lot of people, you know a lot of people. I'm sure we can introduce people to one another. So thank you again for all that you do, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I hope you have fun.
Thank you. Nice to chat to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Take care and speak again soon.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Please like and subscribe, or if you are listening via podcasting service and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.